to tonight's Planning Commission meeting. I'll ask the always punctual Commissioner Keldorf to lead us all in the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, thank you, Michelle. Can we have roll call, please?
Chair Baldino,
Here.
Vice Chair Newman,
Present.
Commissioner Keldorf,
Here.
Commissioner Wingate,
Here.
and Commissioner Heschler.
Excuse me. Thank you, Venus. Now it's the time for public communications. Anyone wishing to address the dais should do so now. Chief, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm here to invite you all to a meeting, and here's the crux of the meeting. I've been in the fire service for 31 years, and up and down the state I hear politicians, administrators, fire chiefs, and firefighters say that we have the best fire department in the area. You never hear the next question of saying, prove it. And so we're going to go through a process to prove that we are the right size, the right department, the right capability in this community through something called accreditation. And it's a 3 to 5 year process that is through the Center for Public Safety Excellence. There are very few departments in the world that have accreditation. And this starts with a strategic planning process. The strategic plan is a community-driven strategic plan, and it's scheduled to occur on Monday, September 9th from 11:30 to 1. It's a working lunch, so we'll provide food and refreshments. It'll be a facilitated discussion with consultants from the Center for Public Safety Excellence, and I'm here to invite you to that meeting. And we're looking forward to having participants from surrounding jurisdictions, from all of our various stakeholders within the community, and residents. So I think flyers are up there, and looking forward to seeing if you could make it and enjoy lunch on us. So thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Can you tell us what are the benefits of having the fire department become accredited? Do I get to reduce my homeowner's insurance?
Well, unfortunately, it doesn't impact your homeowner insurance or your business insurance. That's ISO rating that comes from a different organization. But accreditation really is an opportunity for the department to determine what the community expectations are, identify what the challenges might be in terms of bridging any gaps, and working hard to improve. And, quite frankly, like any institution, you've heard of hospitals that are accredited, universities that are accredited. This is no different. It's an effort of constant, continuous self-improvement. And what we're able to do is to articulate to the people that pay their taxes and the businesses and the politicians here in town that we are indeed the right organization providing the exceptional services that are expected for this community. So you get, in essence, a department that's willing to expose some deficiencies and work towards improving them.
That's great. And the meeting is Monday, September 9th, 11:30 a.m. to 1 o'clock at the Jocelyn Center?
Correct.
And everyone's invited to come?
There's an RSVP. We ask that you can if you'll RSVP so that we can make sure we have enough food there.
All right. Well, thank you for improving what you already do. I think is a great job. But if there's improvement, fantastic.
Great. Thank you.
I have a quick question.
Yes, ma'am.
This is the first of several strategic plan meetings you're having, or if somebody can't attend this meeting, is there another opportunity for them to participate?
So this is the first of 3 elements, and this one is the strategic plan, which is 1 day of a community external stakeholder, and then we do 3 days of internal stakeholders meetings, and from that we craft the strategic plan. And then we go on to the next step, which is phase 2. It's a community risk analysis and a standard of cover, which is what's the risk
Internally done, or is there another outreach to the community?
There may be, quite frankly, I don't know, but I
Okay.
suspect there'll be opportunities for outreach,
But you'll let us know.
and we'll let you know.
Perfect.
Yeah. Thank
We
you.
appreciate
Okay, thank you.
what you do. Thank you very
you.
much.
Have a good meeting.
Anyone else wishing to make any public comments? Now's your time. All right. Seeing no one else, I will close public communication. Next item on the agenda is consent calendar. There's nothing there, which bring us to written communications. Do you have anything?
No, we do not.
All right. So now we'll move on to new business. Our first item. H1 is the 2019-2020 Capital Improvement Program with the City of El Segundo General Plan. Can we have a staff report, please?
Mr. Lifan Shu from the Public Works Department will address the commission.
Hi, good evening, Commissioners. I'm the financial city engineer. So each year I come before you, and the agenda is pretty simple. It's to approve the proposed project are consistent with the general plans, and all of the project actually is really falls under land use number 7, which is provision of quality infrastructure. And then all the Parks and Rec project will fall under number 6, maintenance of the parks and recreation. So in terms of the agenda itself, it's very simple, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, there is a committee of citizens called the Capital Improvement Program Advisory Committee, correct?
Correct.
And they would give a score ranking to each of the projects to kind of put them in a priority, correct?
Correct.
How come some of the items on here don't have any score rating from the community members?
So the purpose of CPAC was to determine, where the general fund will be allocated. So that was how the CPAC was formed. And a lot of the project that's like a water and sewer project, they have their own funding sources. And the CPAC from the beginning has made a determination that's not something they will be looking at. They will be focused on their energy to determine to rank the project that would be use general fund. And then that way the council can make a decision and focus on those. So that's one category. And then the other category will be facility maintenance. So that is something new that because we just had a facility conditioning report and done this year. So we have really a 20-year plan on the facility project. So it's something that doesn't fit the existing criteria of the CPAC, and it's something we still try to figure out what they may come up with a different standard to run this in the future. But for now, it's the 5 criteria that are used for the ranking. Most of them don't really apply to the facilities at this point. So.
Okay. So I understand like the road funds, they'll say funding source, gasoline
Right.
tax, and there'll be no score.
Right.
But tell me about the $1 million for City Hall security. Why wasn't that run through CPAC? Who came up with the idea that we're going to spend $1 million on security at City Hall?
So that is come after the CPAC has concluded. It was proposed by the new city manager.
The
so
who?
The new city manager.
Who's that?
The new city manager.
Oh, okay.
Scott,
So that
yeah,
wasn't
so-
from City Council?
That has not been approved by city council yet. So it's
And it hasn't gone through CPAC?
it hasn't gone through CPAC. It came after the CPAC has concluded.
Okay.
So it's something
Well,
that
isn't that something we should put in the line and have reviewed by CPAC? Because
could.
the only
It-
information we have, all
right.
it says is entrance, City Hall security, and energy efficiency, $1 million from the general fund. And this hasn't been reviewed by the CPAC commission, whose job it is to review expenditures from the general fund and find out if they're in the benefit of the public. Why hasn't this been reviewed, and how can we get this back in the process so that it gets a proper review from the public?
it could, but it basically came after we have concluded the CPAC process.
So then why wouldn't it be in the next year?
It could, so that's why it's up to the city council to, determine how. So it's still as of today, I believe it's still undecided. So it's put before the city council consideration. So
Okay, but
Yeah.
it's also before us to decide.
Yes, but it's for before you. It's for consider consistency of the general plan. And also you can comment on it and in terms of for council consideration as well. So
Right. There isn't any information to tell us what that means. So how are we supposed to determine what the improvements are, if it complies with the general plan or not? I mean, it's $1 million blank check.
Yeah, but it's really, it's all of the dollar will be spent in terms of improving the quality of the infrastructure. So it will be still consistent with the number 7 NGOs. It's provision of quality infrastructure. So.
Yeah, you could say that about
yeah.
spending money on anything. I mean, the whole idea of CPAC is that the public gives input on how to spend the general fund and rates priorities. And you're telling me the city managers put in $1 million check, and we don't know what that's for, but because it's going to be spent on a building, it kind of complies with the general plan. So my concern is that that has not gone through the process that all these other things have gone through. And it's not cheap. It's $1 million for who knows what.
I also have a question about the things that come through before CPAC for the last many, many years that rank but then fall off the radar. How is that there's a lot of things that maybe rank but didn't get to the top 12 or 15, and then what happens to those? They just go away and they have to be resubmitted
So
as a request?
So basically, for those is every year it would be, each department will evaluate those projects, and then every
Do
year.
they get resubmitted, or do they roll over to the next year and
Not
then the
necessarily.
pile becomes
Not
bigger?
necessarily. If there a higher priority arise, then they
Okay.
will not be resubmitted. But
So the
if
high
it-
priority has been resubmitted?
So correct. It's every year. It's evaluate every year. So
I understand.
Yeah, so it may be, considered worth to put before the CPAC in 1 year, and the next year condition may have changed, or they may have higher priority project that has a rise, and then it may not go back. But for others, if it's consistently ranked at a high priority, like
Yeah.
the plunge, every year is gone before the CPAC. So
Right.
So it's really just every year everything will be relooked at, and it's not. It's
Well,
not
I obviously read over this as well, and that's the
Right.
one thing that stood out for me was that number 8, City Hall security and energy efficiency at $1 million. So that's the one thing that I had a lot of questions for. There was not enough information to really give anybody what sorts of security is it that are needed, and what sorts of energy efficiency changes would be made, and how is it
How'd
you
you get $1
break
million?
down for $1 million?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You just pull out $1 million.
The scope, we don't have the exact scope yet. We do have.
Well, the exact scope would be from whomever, like perhaps the city manager would have itemized issues or have seen concerns that this particular city doesn't have that maybe some of the other cities that he's worked for, so there should be recommendations. I think that it should be like maybe just a little more itemized clarification so that the explanation for how the dollars are going to be used, right?
Well, and
Those
once
are
that's
good
done,
suggestions.
it should go through the process like everything else.
I
and
agree.
Be rated by the citizens.
Because it feels like it's jumped ahead of something like
Yeah.
the plunge that's been on
That's
there
right.
for years and
That's
years.
right.
I mean, that's almost
And there's
half
no
of the
information about what we're
plunge
spending $1 million
budget.
on.
Right.
I agree.
Right.
And I have questions about the Acacia Pool. It seems to be a moving target. According to this
Right.
document, it is approved to have a swimming pool and a new restroom, but the city council hasn't approved that. I mean, it's still
Right.
in discussion.
Right.
It's a very
Right.
They're
contentious.
still discussing it. The last decision they have made is going forward with the pool and the park. So that's
So this CPAC, is this number 1 item on here, additional monies to get the Acacia Park funded?
I believe it's number 2.
It's number one.
The number one is plunge.
Number 1.
Number 1 is plunge.
Number 1 is Acacia Park improvements, according to our packet.
Plunge isn't even on here, man.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't even have the
The
plunge
plunge has
on
been
there.
broken forever.
Yeah.
It's page
The
2
plunge
in
has
our
been on there
packet.
every
Yeah, the
year.
plunge. The
honestly.
reason the
I
plunge
don't know
is
why
not
it's
here.
not on there.
Most frustrating.
Yeah.
The plunge is not here because it's right now the plunge is still only in scope assessment. It's only for funding purpose. And the project that's on here is actually those that will be implemented next year. So
So can you
So-
explain that a little
yeah,
bit?
let me explain a little bit. So for a big project like the plunge, it's it's not something that can be done within a year. So it's really a multiple year project. So for something like this, like a fire station number 2, before it, that was the way it was built. Is every year it's some funding is put into it. So and then I believe fire station number 2 was after 10 years when the concept was initially
So in that
approved.
scenario, I'm sorry to
Right.
interrupt you, but you would fund, we would approve, city council would approve the plunge for year 1
Right.
to get started, year 2 to get started the next
Right.
year, and then year 3, it becomes not even on the list, so it no longer gets funded to continue the process of upgrading it?
No, if the city council approve it, it would be basically.
But it's not on the list?
It's not proposed for next year.
Right,
It's not proposed for next
So
year.
then-
That's
so
why
then-
it's not on the list.
okay.
Did
So-
we previously approve, I remember, a scope of
A scope.
work?
So
Right.
that's already been. That's a carryover. So it's not something newly proposed. That's
Then what
already.
happens is then 5 years later, the scope of work has increased, and then we have to revise the scope of work, and then we go back and
And
spend
that has
more
to be
money.
done in 1 year, right? That money has to be spent within
It-
1 year?
No, it doesn't
No,
have to.
okay.
It's just list something that you can start but there's nothing about a plunge in terms of.
Because the plunge would be like not a request that from a person or a place or a citizen. The plunge would be a city
Yeah, but-
request. It should
right,
be on the list
it
for
was
CPAC.
requested by Recreation and Parks Department.
Exactly, by Rec and
So,
Parks. Yeah.
It would. So that the reason it's not on here is because it's not. There's nothing in terms of budget proposed for next year. It's really for the year after.
Right,
So-
right. So just like number 8, I'm wondering if we could just add the plunge?
Or swap it?
Swap
So
it?
it's not $1 million
million
in
dollars.
2021?
It's that's not, the city council can decide however they want it,
Correct.
But it's not.
But this body of commissioners can make suggestions, recommendations, whether we feel that it's in this list as it's proposed to us, or as we're reading it, whether we feel it's the best.
That's probably the
We're
question
not.
for
We're
the city
not.
attorney.
I wouldn't recommend the planning commission make recommendations on these projects. Really, the scope of this inquiry is whether or not these projects comply with the general plan.
That's it, just general planned issues.
Well,
Yes, as the planning
Sure.
commission, you are the planning agency of the city.
right. But if there's an abnormality and something shows up that hasn't gone through the process, I think we would be remiss not to point that out and say, why is this $1 million being spent without the proper review being done?
Well, all I would say is that that project, the planning commission's purview is to compare whether or not that complies with the general plan. If the commission needs information as to whether or not that project complies with the general plan, staff is happy to bring that information back.
Right.
I don't
then-
think it's really the planning commission's purview to dictate the process. I would respectfully suggest that the planning commission allow that staff to address that issue when we present it to the city council.
Or we can continue this and you guys can come back to us.
What I would recommend is I think there's a timeline here because we're presenting this as part of the budget. If the City Hall renovation security issue is the only project that's of concern, what I would say is maybe we can set that aside and then staff can provide more information about that at an upcoming meeting.
Well-
I'm just suggesting if the commission's comfortable with the balance of the projects, the resolution is ready for adoption.
So we can approve everything except for item 8, City Hall security / energy efficiency, because we have been given no information what that is.
Absolutely. Staff's happy to bring more information back about that, so you can make a decision about it.
Sounds reasonable?
My impression is that the city manager has sort of fast-tracked that project. There have been some security incidents at City Hall. and there's concerns about staff safety, the safety of staff. So I think that's why the city manager wants to sort of fast track that project, which is why maybe it hasn't gone through the normal process. But again, if the commission needs more information, happy to bring that back.
So are you suggesting we just pull item 8 and that comes back to us and we push everything else forward? So then you're going to present a budget that's short $1 million in capital improvements because it's not going to be before city council?
No, what I would say is that I think we can probably bring that information back at the next meeting, and hopefully it can be included in the budget cycle. My impression is that that's the only project that the commission's concerned about, so I just don't see the value in holding up all the other projects and the finding of determination that it's consistent with the general plan at this time. But again, it's up to the pleasure of the commission. If the commission doesn't want to take an action on any of the projects, then we can just bring the item back at a future meeting as well. It's up to the commission.
When does this go to council?
This has been presented to the council, but they won't make the decision until at least the next meeting.
So they've seen this list.
So they have discussed this.
Right, they have taken the information in and have discussed it, but they won't approve it until I think the official budget approval, which I believe could be either the first or second meeting in September. So.
Huh.
So that train has left the station.
No, we're just rubber stamping stuff
That's
now.
right.
Yeah.
It's like, why even bother coming to us, really?
So council is actually there. They've already discussed it. They're already well within their conversation about it. Whether the planning commission does anything about it at all, it'll just move forward regardless.
No, actually, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, you play a really valuable role because you're sort of the keepers of the general plan. And so the council is looking to you under state law. This is actually a state law that the commission, as the planning agency of the city, has to make a determination that any projects as part of the capital improvement program are consistent with the general plan. So it's actually a really important role that you're playing.
But we're saying that it would hold up the budget approval, is what we're saying,
Yeah, because
until it comes back to us before us for the next meeting.
Yeah, as part of that budget process, it's usually that the planning commission has weighed in as far as the conformance with the general plan.
And our next meeting is after city council's next meeting. So they would be able to discuss it, and either you would report that the planning commission requested further information on a particular item.
Right.
And then you would suggest to them that they would hold off the approval unless they chose to do something other.
It's a little bit of a, we haven't done that in the past, but what we could do is just allow the council to approve the budget, and then pending with the caveat that the planning commission has not weighed in on the general plan conformance. But I don't think that the council is going to hold up the entire budget just for the planning commission to make that general plan conformance finding. So,
Or they could decide not to spend the $1 million on that line item, right?
yeah, that's totally within the purview of the city council. Absolutely.
Okay.
So as city council, did they ask similar questions as we have, wondering
They
how
have
the $1
some
million is going to be spent, and they did?
very similar question.
Very
very
similar
similar.
questions, and the answers, we're still waiting for answers, right? So the city
So-
council hasn't been explained either,
Well,
where the $1 million, the recommendation to spend $1 million.
Not the exact scope, because the scope has not been developed. But in the general idea is has been explained as enhanced security and energy
Metal
efficiency.
detectors, I mean, what?
No scope at this point.
No scope, okay.
Just a blank check.
Yeah.
$1 million.
Yep.
So no scope, so the city council didn't ask drill down questions either?
They did question it, so
Okay.
it's not for me to answer those questions.
Gotcha.
So,
So who would
That's-
answer those questions then? Staff would come back
Well,
with drill down recommendations?
let me see if I can answer the question. I think the plan, I want to kind of distinguish the role of CPAC and the role of the planning commissioner. We're not asking the planning commissioners to rank these projects.
We're not
right?
doing that.
We're taking a look at these projects and we're seeing if they're consistent or inconsistent with the general plan. And when you compare that to, the words that I see in the report is, are these projects to maintain and upgrade existing excellent parks, recreation, and open space facilities in El Segundo, to provide the highest quality public facility services and public infrastructure possible to the community. So are these projects consistent with the goals that are set in the general plan? That is what we're asking the planning commissioners to do. We're not asking for the ranking of the projects. Those things are done by CPAC and ultimately decided by the council.
But this one was not ranked by CPAC.
It wasn't. So I would say one possible thing, this would be a question to council too, is could we move this forward with a recommendation from the planning commission that this specific item be ranked by CPAC or brought in a different path?
Well, every other thing we have here has details on design costs, construction costs, photographs of what's being repaired, explanations of why it's being repaired. And for this $1 million, it simply says, let me get to the page. Enhance City Hall security and energy efficiency from the general fund. There is no information there for us to evaluate what that's being spent on and whether or not that complies with the general fund. Or, I'm sorry, the general plan, because we weren't provided any information. I don't see how we
you're
would be doing our job.
You're unable to make a determination if it's consistent with the general
It's
plan.
A sentence that is one,
So I
two,
think-
three,
I think
four,
we have two choices.
6 words long.
I think we have two choices. We either make those notes and document that and bring that forward to council with those recommendations, or we approve the rest of the projects tonight. And if, I'm not sure how the timing will go, if time permits, we will come back to the planning commission with more details of that project and then hopefully have it ready for council's decision in the future.
Yeah,
Can we-
I think either option will be.
Yeah, do you think we have time to bring?
But Sam,
bring
even
it-
if you did that, it's still not being ranked by the community members who have been
That's true.
selected to do that
That is
job.
true.
And that's
Mhm.
more information that I would like to have. I know we're not
Right.
doing the ranking,
Right.
but it's important to know that it's at least gone through the process
Right.
and that things aren't happening
Your
that
recommendation
no one
is-
knows about.
Yeah.
And to me, this doesn't sit well. And so I'm okay with the other projects. I'm not a fan of putting another pool in town and spending money on that, but that's not my job to decide. I can tell you a pool would fit within Parks and Rec, but I can't tell you what energy efficiency and enhancing City Hall security has to do with the general plan because there's no information here. And so I am okay moving, well, we'll open up public communication before we do that. Any more questions for staff before we go to public communication? Nope. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure. So it is a public hearing. I will open up public communication. Anyone else wishing to discuss this with the, nope. All right. I'll close public communication. All further comments will come from the commission. Any additional comments on this one? I personally, I'm okay approving everything except for that $1 million. I don't see how we would be doing our job without any information on what that's for, and I really do not like the idea that that somehow has been.
I will move to approve all of the items with exception of number 8, as we feel that they comply with the general plan consistency.
Yeah, I'll second that. We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Thank you. All right, now we're moving on to our next public hearing. This is a site plan review and conditional use permit for the Nash Street extension. And consideration and possible action regarding approval of a site plan review and conditional use permit for the 7.34 acre multi-use site consisting of 6 separate buildings, including 2-story medical office, 1 bank, 2 restaurants, and 2 drive-through fast food restaurants at 2100 to 2198 El Segundo Boulevard. Can we have a staff report on this one, please?
Yes, the staff report is going to be given by the consultant from CSG working for the city, Gina Guizer. I want to say first, though, that we removed the CUP from consideration because it is still completely valid from the previous approval. So there was, the only thing that it would have changed would have been possibly the location, which can be handled under site plan review.
The CUP was for the drive-throughs?
Yes, those were approved in September of 2017, I believe.
I noticed in the drawing the queue is only like 11 cars.
Yeah, the site plan can address that as well. But the question of the conditional use permit is that runs with the land that's already in place. That's not in question. They are entitled to the drive-throughs, but how they're arranged, you can deal with that through site plan review.
Okay. All right.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and fellow commissioners. So tonight before you, for your consideration, is the Nass Street Exchange Site Plan Review, Modified Site Plan Review. So the site is located at 2100 to 2198 El Segundo Boulevard, and the applicant is CDC Mar Retail 1 LLC. So this is on the Raytheon campus site. The site plan is designed to provide a vibrant campus-like environment with a variety of public spaces and buildings sited to front El Segundo Boulevard. And for reference, the previously approved site plan, you can see the buildings were mostly located towards the south side of the project. So the project design incorporates comprehensive features for site layout, building design, architecture, landscape, signage, and lighting, which are consistent with the El Segundo South Campus specific plan. Project level plans for landscape, signage, lighting were all prepared and included with the submittal. This site plan review, the modification, was determined that the site plan was consistent with the El Segundo South Campus specific plan. The project is phase 1 of the plan and consistent with the design guidelines and development standards. So for your reference, as Greg mentioned, the original application came in July of 2017 and was approved September of 2017 by the Planning Commission, and building permits were issued in December of 2017. So the request includes review for 65,650 square feet on 7.34 acres, and uses include a 4,300 square foot medical office, a bank, 2 restaurants, and 2 drive-through restaurants, or drive-through buildings, and of course the general plan and zoning are El Segundo South Campus specific plan. The FAR is 0.22. Maximum height for this plan is 35 feet. There will be class 1 bike lanes constructed on El Segundo Boulevard per the specific plan. There will be pedestrian and bicycle access to the metro station, and findings can be made to support the approval. So finally, in conclusion, the project is exempt. Per the EIR, any portion of the project developed consistent with the SP is exempt from further CEQA analysis, and appropriate conditions of approval have been incorporated. So staff recommends that you adopt Resolution 2869 approving the associated application. Thank you, and staff is available for questions.
You threw up the original site plan. Can you go back to that slide, please?
Certainly.
the drive-throughs here are on the western side, correct? That restaurant there with retail? And then the other one where the drive-through line actually wraps around, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. Are there markings on there that shows how many cars fit in those queues?
Right,
Yes.
Right, that's what
That's
I'm
what we
asking about.
right.
I
There-
want to know how many cars were in that drive-through versus what the new plan is, because the new plan, it looks like there's 12 and then maybe 11 on one.
Right, it was 8 cars for the previous application, and now there are 10 accommodated in the new application.
You're saying 8 at both of these queues?
Yes.
Okay. And then besides that, what other changes were made?
Well, the total square footage was reduced, as well as the trip cap. Circulation is generally the same, so there's the exit on Nash on right in, right out on El Segundo. And uses are generally the same, 2 drive-throughs.
If I can, the big difference is the market is no longer part of the project.
Right, that was Smart and Final, right?
Yes.
Smart and Final was the reason why they needed that intersection, I recall.
Well, the applicant can speak to that.
Okay.
And the flow of traffic as you exit on the east part of the property, you have traffic both ways coming in off of El Segundo Boulevard into the Raytheon property. And that still is a fairly big concern of mine about cars queuing there to get off the property.
Yeah, let's go to the.
Yeah, look at the
yeah.
new site, that's
Yeah.
fine,
Yeah.
that, right there, especially since you've got a drive-through there, so, cars
Right, I see what you're
exiting
saying.
that, they have to cross over traffic coming from your left, looking at traffic from the right, in order to get in, to go across because there's multiple lanes, I remember, to be able to turn left, to get out, to either turn right or left or go straight on.
Well, they can't, so if they are to leave to go east on Nash, they can only turn south, turn right.
So if they-
It's
but-
right out only. They're not, so if
So if
cars
I'm
were
leaving
to-
on Nash, I can only go right into the Raytheon property,
Correct,
and there's going to be a security gate there.
correct. So, and it's going to be that. Well, it misses, it's intended to serve
So you
the
mean,
campus.
if I'm right there by that drive-through, and I'm completed my business, and I want to exit that area, I can
Yep.
only turn right there?
If I may.
If you go, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, that right turn off of the property onto Nash is only going to be available for Raytheon employees
Yeah.
because you're going to hit a security gate immediately.
Okay.
So there are signs proposed to be in this area that will say that, do not exit here unless you're a Raytheon employee, exit on Continental or exit on El Segundo.
So those people that get down in that area just have to go, oh my God, until they're well-trained.
Well,
Where are the security
that's part of the
gates?
reason why the central driveway is proposed on El Segundo,
It's
so
not
that
indicated.
everybody doesn't have to exit all the way over on
The
Continental.
previous plan
Same-
approved exiting there
It had the
to
same
go completely.
configuration.
It
So,
has the same configuration, but you could actually exit
yeah, but
to
again,
turn left, to then
no,
turn right or
no.
left.
no, that was not true, because during rush hour, when the Raytheon employees are leaving on Nash, there's no way anybody will be able to make a left there. So it was the same arrangement. You can see there's a right turn only arrow there.
Yeah.
And that right turn, oops, that was only going to be available to Raytheon employees because you're going to hit a guard shack immediately
Yes.
and a gate.
Where's the guard shack?
It's
not indicated on
it's
here.
it's not.
It's down below.
It's
like
like
this.
just
right here.
above that where the right around
Why
there.
isn't it indicated? I mean, this was a big issue that we had, was the parking, was the entrance and the exit. Why
The
isn't
flow.
why isn't it indicated here?
Well, because they don't know exactly where it will be after
But,
they
I
move
mean,
all the
but
parameters.
This
So-
indicates that people are going to be able to come onto Nash heading south and go completely around that facility. And that is
No,
not
but that
true.
was resolved at the last September of 2017 meeting, where it was determined that that's off of this property, that's in the Raytheon portion, and Raytheon still controls the perimeter, and this applicant does not control that
Well, we
perimeter.
talked
No,
about
we
that during,
understand that. I
during
understand,
traffic
I
though,
understand.
Greg,
But
but
it's not
you could actually
indicated
turn
on
left.
this. From what I understand, show me where the guard shack is on Nash.
Let me have the.
Down below.
The guard shack is currently about here. It's going to be relocated to about here.
This is the same issue that we had the last
Yeah,
time.
it's exactly the same issue. And that's why the previous site plan did not have a left out on Nash.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense, but I am disappointed that this plan that was submitted to us does not indicate that there is a guard shack there and that traffic cannot go all the way around.
Well, that's on a
this
different
facility.
property, though.
I
And-
understand it's
yeah.
on a different property, but it's not on the plan that was submitted to us.
Still has to do with circulation.
It really affects the circulation, and so this was misleading, and I'm disappointed.
So, okay, so let's assume the guard shack's going to be
Right.
there.
And there's going to be a guard shack on both sides, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, that's
And I know
fine.
we talked about this in September, but it is still a confusing intersection. If you've never been there, you want to head, you're starting to head east, and you get there and say, oh, wow, I can't, I have nowhere to go. I can't turn left here onto Nash, I can only turn right, if I get to the guard shack, I got to turn around. You add that to the confusion. I think we got away with that last year, or last year, because all the drive-throughs were on the west side.
Yeah.
Now you got
Yeah.
the drive-through right there, and so I think that's gonna add a lot of confusion to that intersection
Is there a median there
in Nash.
On El Segundo
on
Boulevard?
Nash?
No,
Oh.
There's no median.
there's no median.
Now, how funny that we all remember what we want to remember, but I do remember that you could come out and turn left.
Yeah, that's
I
right.
remember that you could do that, and we thought, oh, that's kind of crazy, because
thought that
you
was
said
weird.
during rush hour that's going to be very, there's going to be a lot of
it's-
traffic to make that happen. I clearly remember that you can, that is the way to go out, but
If
it's
you-
not safe, because you got to
if-
go all the way across.
Yeah, if you recall, it said we couldn't make a left because of the curve and because of the line of sight. They said that it was unsafe to do a
For-
left turn from there. That's what I recall.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense, but I completely remember that's a kind of was a ridiculous way to get out. So,
Yeah, I'm concerned about traffic backing up to get through those drive-throughs because if people are going to be heading south on Nash in order to get into those drive-throughs, if you look at, I don't know what drive-through, what companies are going to be there.
it's
but
it's
if you-
almost
but if
it's almost like you'd have to say no exit, so that if people got all the way down there, then they would be able to turn right and go through the parking lot and make their way back out one of the other two ways. I mean, you'd have to, and then if you're a Raytheon employee, you just sort of would know that you can go do that, because I can get past the guard gate,
Yeah,
right? I mean, isn't that sort of?
It is no exit for most people.
right.
Well, exactly. It's not an exit.
I
So
just-
somehow,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just saw an aerial photo of, there is a small median there.
so you could,
Yeah,
there is a
it's-
small median.
You can't make a left anyway. There's a small
Okay.
median right along this segment here, and it stops about here, right in front of the guard shack.
And so
Which
what
is
happens
fine.
when you make a right? Is there an easy turnaround?
Well, no, it won't be easy at all. You'll have to negotiate with the guard shack and then get into the flow of exiting traffic to get out.
So what if there
that's
was
why-
no exit there?
That's why, well, because the Raytheon
Right.
employees can use it, and it's mostly an in. And there will be plenty of signs that say, this is not an exit to El Segundo Boulevard or whatever.
So we're using it to enter the property,
That's an entrance, yes.
so there'll be signage that says no exit. And then
That's
if you,
one
and then
solution.
if you're a
Ano-
card-carrying Raytheon person,
Yeah,
then you'll
another
know.
possible solution would be just not to have the right turn lane there. I don't know how that would work for the applicant. That would be something to consider.
Yeah,
Another,
just not an exit.
yeah, that's one. That could be an in only. And to the extent that this drive-through creates a conflict potentially with this entrance, that's a valid site plan consideration to consider putting it in a different location. Absolutely.
Yeah, because if you look at In-N-Out, You know, they've got 30 cars in line some days.
This is probably not going to ever be of that magnitude, but it's still a really valid concern.
Yeah, I'm thinking of a similar intersection at the Marina Marketplace where there's a pavilion, or Ralph's there or something. You turn in off Fiji Way, you can only enter. There's no exit out. And I think that works pretty well. So that might be a good solution because you don't want to discourage people from getting in there coming off Nash, but the only people it's going to discourage are Raytheon employees who want to make a quick right out there.
And I'll remind everyone that there is a pedestrian access for Raytheon employees in this area. So
Yeah.
why a Raytheon employee would drive to this site and then drive out again is kind of a mystery.
Well, they might drive there in the morning,
Might.
stop, and then head into the.
They can go out Continental
They
then.
just go out on El Segundo Boulevard and go around.
Yeah, or that.
That feels much safer. It feels like it would help with the flow.
I have another question too. What's going to happen to the median on El Segundo Boulevard where the trees are?
Say that again, Carol?
A lot of it,
Median on El Segundo Boulevard, are there trees there?
There's lots of trees.
yeah,
There
a
are
lot.
now, but I wonder in the future.
A lot of those trees will have to be removed for the turn lanes to make all the traffic flow work.
And where are the pedestrian crosswalks across El Segundo Boulevard?
Currently at this intersection and at this intersection, but if this is a signalized intersection, then that's a possibility there as well. And that will be something that will be addressed during the design phase of that intersection and the timing phases of the lights.
You've got hotels on the other side of this site. I can see people crossing there
I think
illegally if
pedestrian
there's not
crossing
a
is
crosswalk.
needed.
Yeah.
Yeah, if there's a
That
signal
could be a
on,
real
that's right.
concern.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got the Residence by Marriott right there, and the Residence Inn right behind it.
Yeah.
By the
You
way,
know-
a bit of good news. The old plan, I was bummed that all those trees were going away because that was all parking lot there. And now that that's retail right on the street, I think that's a much better solution. So I think it'll be a nice view along El Segundo. So I like that.
And just out of curiosity, why is the urgent care not going to be street frontage as well?
As I understand, that was their request, and the applicant can probably address that better. In an ideal world, we like to see things that are on the sidewalk, but urgent care doesn't generate pedestrian
Foot
traffic. Everybody who goes there is going to be in a hurry, and they're going to drive. Maybe we should put it right next to the crosswalk. Yeah, that was, as I understand, was the tenant's preference.
All right, any other questions for staff? If not, I think we should open public communication and talk to the applicant.
Thinking back to the plan last year, now it's come before us again. Are we approving this just because the footprint has changed? I mean, what's our mission here?
Yeah, this is a revised site plan, so every aspect of site plan is up for grabs.
We're not discussing the intersection, though.
Which
Or
intersection are you
we're
talking
not
about?
discussing turning the turn lane from El Segundo Boulevard.
I hope not.
Up off of El Segundo Boulevard?
Yeah.
That, where the signal will be?
Mm-hmm.
No, that's
No.
been,
We spent a lot of time on that, and I think it's condition 90 something that is the longest condition in the list of conditions of approval that still holds on this project, that addresses how this will be approved. It is going to be a tentative approval, sort of a trial period, but there's also conditions on how the timing will be set up and so forth to see that it actually works. So it's already been thoroughly hashed out. That's
And
why.
in fact, one of the capital improvements is for this section, right?
Yeah, that's purely coincidental, but yeah, from El Segundo from PCH to Aviation is part of the capital improvement projects for next year.
You're going to have to explain to me condition 90, Greg. How can the intersection be tentatively approved? I mean,
No,
it's
the-
never going away.
The driveway's approved, subject to your site plan review. So currently, this way, let me, that driveway is already approved right here.
Right?
What's tentatively approved are the signals. They can be removed, in which case there won't be a left turn signal or phase. It'll be as traffic breaks from the westbound El Segundo Boulevard onto the site. The signal allows well, it's signal control, so everything. But without the signals, then people who want to make a left turn from the westbound El Segundo will just have to wait for a break in traffic,
They have to pray.
which is,
Yeah.
possible. If I were the driver, I would just go to Continental and deal with
Right.
it. But right. So to clarify, and that was a good point. Thank you. The driveway is already approved in the old site plan, and any failure to approve today's site plan or to deny it would, this still holds. So the driveway's still there. In the same position. It's just the signals that are controlled by condition 90. So the signals will be installed and then tested and then adjusted and tested, and then if they don't work, they'll be out.
I believe that's what we talked about. It's like really going to take out a signal once it's there.
Yes. Yeah. If it doesn't work and it creates more problems than it solves, yes.
And are there milestones? I mean, who decides if it's working or not? Is it a 6-month review?
The director of public works. I haven't read that for over a year, so
Right.
we'd have to go back and take a look at it.
Okay. Do you have it there, Mr. King?
But with this site plan, since that driveway's been approved, we can talk about the no exit on the east side of the property. We can talk
Yeah.
about that. Okay.
Yeah, condition 96, I believe, sets up 24-month intervals for reevaluation after the initial evaluation, which comes immediately after it becomes operational.
So every 2 years?
2 years.
Yeah, but the public works director has made it clear that if it's a complete disaster and a failure, then he won't wait 2 years. They'll just turn it off.
Okay. All right. All right, any other questions for staff? No? All right. Let's open public communication. As always, first right goes to the applicant.
See, we do have a presentation here. We'll just need to bring it up.
Sam, can you load that PDF? Lionel.
Ah, there it is. View full screen, I think. Overview on the left-hand menu there. Full screen mode. There we go. Planning commissioners, thank you for having us. I heard a lot of important questions for the projects. I hope I could clarify some of those.
Can you just introduce yourself for us?
I'm sorry, Lionel Uri with Mar Ventures.
Hi, Lionel.
We also have representatives from Continental Development as well, and we are the applicants. So I'll go through this presentation, and you can feel free to interject if you have questions along the way. I did hear, a number of the questions, but also give a little bit more background on how we got from where we were to where we are. So we're all familiar with the location of the project as part of the Raytheon South Campus specific plan. There's a little bit of an aerial there that also shows the current medians on Nash and Continental, just for reference, as those were being discussed a little bit previously. The previous project was for 75,500 square feet. We were anchoring that center with a grocer, the Smart and Final. It was a grocer anchored retail center. And essentially, the grocer backed out of the project very far in the process. And the previous approval we had when we were here was CUP for the 2 drive-throughs. And since the grocer backed out, we had to accommodate the new users. And as it happens often, one door closed and another one opened up for us in the form of joint venture between Torrance Memorial Medical Center and Cedars-Sinai Medical Center to open a larger 43,000 square foot medical office and also urgent care facility at the site. And it was, we were really happy to be able to bring them on board to have this kind of a facility open in El Segundo. It's going to be a significant investment for them in the South Bay, and we were really happy that they chose El Segundo and our project for that facility, as well as one of the early joint ventures between the two of them. So ultimately, we have 9,850 less project square footage, and we still have the same 2 drive-throughs, although, as you noted, they've switched sides of the site. This was the previous plan, all backed off, kind of all the parking up front, as dictated by the market user, and also what is more desirable from the medical users with the drive-throughs on the west side. And the reason they're on the west side in this one is the major user, the larger user on the site, the anchor user, typically will not want to have drive-throughs because they have, a fair amount of square footage, and they'd rather them be on the other side of the property, which is why we ended up having to flip the drive-throughs over to this side of the property to accommodate the medical office user. The tenants right now that we're talking to, Torrance Memorial Medical Center and Cedars-Sinai, as we mentioned, for the medical building. Pad 2 shown there, we're talking to banks, credit unions. One of the pads, Pad 3, is a Panera, who we're very far along with for taking that drive-through. And the other drive-through, we're talking to a couple different drive-through users. And then we're in discussion with multiple food tenants as kind of a last piece for buildings 4 and 5 there once we have gotten the rest of our tenant mix sorted out. Just going through the designs, this is in the package as well, I believe, but just wanted to give a feel of kind of the, modern but tasteful design aesthetic, wooden materials, generous landscaping, a modern facility with the finishes, architectural finishes, board form concrete, brick, wood veneer, pavers, and outdoor patio seating areas. And I'll just stop here for a second to talk about some of the items that you were discussing previously. So you can see here in this plan a little bit better what's happening over on Nash and Continental. So on Nash Street, as you had indicated, it's a little bit of a different situation where people can approach Nash and enter the site. They can make a right in, but if they make a right out, and the signage is basically going to be no right turn, Raytheon employees only would be the signage. And if someone happens to make a right turn out of there anyways, they would hit the guard shacks, the newly relocated guard shack, which is right here, the other one's over here. They'd hit this gate and they'd say, oh, whoops, and then the Raytheon security officer would direct them to go through this turnaround here, which would put them back out in this direction. And that's the thought process on this particular entry and exiting point. But I know that you probably have more questions and thoughts about that or other items, so I'll turn it over to you to ask any questions you might have and stop the presentation here.
So a concern is with that drive-through on the very eastern.
Oops.
Oh. And if
This
that
one
gets
here.
back up, yeah, is that going to affect the ability from people to get into the project from Nash? And what's your plan of action if that becomes so popular that you're now affecting traffic or affecting Raytheon employees' ability to get to work?
I think operationally what would happen in that instance, well, two things. One, there's still 2 lanes so the Raytheon employees can go, around, but we don't want it to get to that point. So operationally what would be happening is that there would be people out here that work with the fast food user to direct people to kind of stack, to go past and stack around into this other parking area.
That sounds really complicated.
Yeah.
It is a little bit complicated, and that's absolutely true.
And what about how close the 2 drive-throughs really are?
We think that this distance between them is sufficient. In other developments, sometimes you'll see them even adjacent. So it's not the perfect situation by any means, but we think this distance is sufficient. We do hear what you're saying about this driveway in these areas, and maybe we could think about a better way to kind of operate this in some form or fashion.
Is there enough space to the right of that far right drive-through to put a double lane?
To do a double lane here?
Correct.
I think that that's something that we could definitely explore. I think that's something that could happen, yes. I think that that's a good suggestion. And it appears
Is there a setback problem?
there may be a setback problem, but if it's not, if
So
it's
it's a
just
smaller
surface
footprint for the
driveway, it
building.
might be okay. So, I think it's something that we can explore to get additional stacking in this drive-through.
Is it possible to move the entrance on Nash Street further south?
To this direction?
Yes. That would give you more stacking area.
We could definitely do some analysis on it or do some combination of trying to get a little bit more stacking in here on this driveway and also.
The problem is you get a conflict with Raytheon.
Mr. Rose, you're going to have to speak at the podium because we have a very large home viewing audience. So come on, step up, tell us who you are, and we'd love to hear what you have to say.
Alex Rose, Senior Vice President of Continental Development. The configuration of the driveways in our negotiations with Raytheon, as we were both planning and purchasing the property from them, had to take into account their operational concerns and their stacking concerns on their employees coming in. So the direct answer to the question in terms of moving it farther south is no, because that would not only not conform with our agreement with them, but would also interfere with their operations. At some point, as I'm sure you know from the overall specific plan, that becomes a public street. So at such time as Nash becomes a public street, you may see a different configuration. But as was pointed out by Greg before, relative to circulation around the south side, that remains Raytheon property and subject to their control. So there isn't a whole lot of other places that we could go with that driveway other than shutting it off completely.
Yeah, my concern is traffic backing up on El Segundo Boulevard.
And and I think your suggestion regarding a double left in is a good one, as Lionel said. The question
Yes.
right. So I think the question for the commission would be, to the extent that we would be violating setbacks, which trade-off would be more preferable. As the retailers would be happy to see some of those trees go away because it's a visibility issue. So, if that landscaping strip was narrowed and you could get a double right into the site off of Nash southbound, they'd probably be delighted. But, we'd need some love from the city on whatever applicable setbacks there are.
The building could be redesigned.
Do you know? Oh, okay, good, Jay. Thanks.
And Carol,
I'm sorry, well, do you know the parking count now versus what it was when we last approved this?
I'll have to look at the parking number. To be honest, it's in here. Hold on.
You think they're about the same?
We did the analysis and submitted that the parking meets the parking that was required by code.
So do you think it's reduced because?
I think it's
overall square
reduced
footage?
because there's less square footage. Yes.
Is there any reason to believe Raytheon would be opposed to taking out that right turn onto Nash for employees?
Raytheon is very particular in protecting all of their positions as it relates to, their employees and making it an, amenity. They're we think it's a good solution to have, pedestrian access here for Raytheon employees as well. And they're very attuned to that and these other ones. So we think it's a potential issue, yeah.
that their
employees.
you think that there would be an issue right turn coming out of the property onto Nash?
I think
If I may interject, when phase 2 of Raytheon's project goes through, Nash Street gets built as a through street all the way to Hughes Way.
Right.
And at that point, you'd really want that right turn.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
They want the right turn.
No, it'll still be outside of Raytheon's perimeter. They won't have any concern any longer, but but everybody will want the right turn then.
So is there a design consideration that allows for that future right turn? If, it's street furniture until it opens up.
So Greg, explain to me what you just said. Then how is that going to benefit once the Nash Street extension gets built?
Nash Street will be built straight through.
Right.
They'll take out the guard shack, they'll take out that big grassy area, and then it'll curve around Raytheon property, or buildings, all the way to Hughes Way, which then connects to PCH. So at that point, it's all dedicated to the city as a public street.
Right.
And
so a right turn is
then
definitely going to be
a desirable
definitely,
feature then.
no
Yeah.
question.
So this is a temporary problem that will go away when phase 2 starts, which should be soon, I hope.
Right, that is correct. Carol, you brought up a very good point about double queuing. What about the other drive-through restaurant?
I think that one will be very difficult to put double queuing in based off of the site area and proximity to the other buildings and the layout of the project. I think the easternmost one will have the highest probability of success, and the other one to the west will be very difficult.
Have you thought about switching the drive-through, the easternmost drive-through with the bank on pad 2?
Mr. Tarnowski can speak to it. Medical users have an opinion.
Good evening, Commissioners. Bob Tarnowski, Senior Vice President, Real Estate, Continental Development. If I could address the Commission and talk about the retailers, and I know Commissioner Newman also had asked about, I think, a positioning on the street as well. We spent an awful lot of time with Cedars and Torrance Memorial, essentially turning the cube on the site. And this location is a result of a fair amount of analysis. And this is a medical office building. In addition to the urgent care, you're going to have specialty uses there, and you'll have a lot of seniors population. And if you had the building up on the street in this location, you've got the drive-through aisle, and for the senior community to get into the medical office building, they'd have to cross this drive-through aisle. In this particular location, you have almost 70 parking stalls right here immediately adjacent to the medical office building. And if you have someone who is partially disabled, having troubles with ambulation, they can simply park here and without getting into a major drive aisle, walk into the project. And it was very important for them to
That
provide
makes sense,
that.
yes. Uh-huh.
But I think Brenda's question was, couldn't the bank switch with the far right drive-through?
Again, as Lionel mentioned earlier, as the anchor tenant, they have a lot of say in a positioning with respect to the site. And
They don't want to have a drive-through in
You-
conjunction with their parking lot and people as opposed to a bank, which gets much less traffic.
Absolutely.
Right.
I mean, they were adamant in that they wanted this use restricted to retail.
To allow most parking for their facility.
Correct.
Uh-huh.
You know, to me, the question is, we discussed this at great length with Chick-fil-A, and we were talking about numbers of 13 or 16 cars, I forget. the
More
count,
than that.
But it was a lot.
That was based
It
on
was
like
a- and I feel
Valencia.
like maybe that stuck in our head, and so I don't know, you know.
You put a Starbucks there, you're going to have 27 cars every morning
Yeah.
trying to stop by that Starbucks.
There's only
the problem is
10.
we don't know what's going to be
Cars
there.
off and walk a little.
That doesn't
But that's
happen.
not going to happen right
I
now.
guarantee the Raytheon employee is going to go there and then he's going to drive through. You know,
Well,
people
to
are-
your point earlier, in the morning, if a Raytheon employee is coming from the freeway, they would make a left-hand turn movement in here. They would either go to Panera or this retailer, grab a cup of coffee and a Danish, and then they would certainly make a right-hand turn right out and go back into
Right.
their campus.
My point is, you put a Starbucks or something popular in that far east drive-through, you're going to be well beyond the 10-car
10.
queue or whatever
This is just
it is.
queued for 10. And if you say, if the city would allow you to adjust the setbacks just for that, that's just solving a problem for one, how we get more people through that particular drive-through, but it doesn't address the other one, and then still the flow feels very congested, and I'm sure you'll agree.
We've actually done studies, and we think you can put 15, 16 cars in a stack if you do a double stack in that particular location. And I mean, I'm not going to sit here and tell
So,
the commission.
no, which is not what you've asked for. No, that's right, which is not what you've asked for.
Yes,
And
some of the retailers, depending on who the retailer is, the demand varies greatly.
Sure.
And some of the retailers don't want a double stack. If indeed we wind up having a retailer in that particular location, I'm quite sure we would be back in front of the commission asking for a double stack because some retailers will require it.
So your experience, since you do know the anchor on the western, the Panera,
Panera has done a lot of study and a lot of work in planning this particular location. This one isn't as further developed as the one on the west side
and
is.
Panera is adequate with your stack of 10.
Yes.
Stack of 10 only, and the flow with on the property is fine for them.
They're comfortable and we're comfortable. I mean, we benefit a lot in that you've got some good synergies in that when the medical office building is at its slack period, this is at its peak demand during the daytime, and conversely, when the medical office building is at its peak period in the morning, typically you're not going to have the same demand from these facilities. So we feel pretty comfortable about the synergies at the site.
So the issue is when we discuss the drive-throughs with In-N-Out and Chick-fil-A, you know, especially with Chick-fil-A on their conditional use permit, if they back up on the street, we take away their drive-through. The problem here is you've already got approval for your drive-through. We just don't like where it is on your plan. So I don't know if we're even allowed to put a condition that says if that drive-through causes havoc on our public streets, you lose your right to a drive-through. And I'm sure that's not what you want, because it'll be very hard for you to get a tenant saying, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. And so it's hard for me to say, I'm going to approve this, and maybe you'll come back and make it work, and maybe you won't.
Commissioner, what Lionel mentioned before, if we have stacking problems, it doesn't work for our center and for us and for Raytheon either. So if we have a situation, we would simply create a stack right there. So we would actually station somebody there, and we would add a stack that goes like this.
All right, and is that written in the elements of approval here? I don't believe there is any requirement to have a parking lot attendant manage the stacking of the drive-throughs.
Well, we would ask of the commission that unless there's a need, we don't have to employ a parking lot attendant. If there was a need, because there was a concern about stacking out on El Segundo Boulevard, we would certainly, of our own volition, go ahead and manage that.
Understood, but I think for myself personally, if I'm going to approve this, I need some justification that this problem we're all foreseeing is not going to happen, because you will have that parking lot attendant. Does that make sense? I get that you're saying, hey, it's in our benefit to make sure it works, and we put a lot of time and thought in its design, but it's our charge to make sure it works for everyone else in town as well. And I get that you're in the business of making your tenants happy. Our job is to make sure everyone else in town is happy. And that street is terrible. Driving in El Segundo Boulevard is horrible. And as I recall from all the traffic studies, this is going to make it worse. I like the fact that the project's a little smaller. That's great. A little less square footage, a little more parking. Fantastic. I've got real concerns about your layouts and your drive-through on this site plan. I have real concerns because I don't know who that tenant is. I don't know how popular it will be. And so I'm kind of at a loss of how to make this work in the form it's being presented to us.
All we might ask is that the commission perhaps let staff use discretion in terms of the need. All we're asking is we don't want to pay to have an attendant standing out there if it's not necessary to have an attendant standing out there. If it's required for the flow of the site and to prevent cars from stacking, we're more than happy to accommodate that.
Wasn't the language on the Chick-fil-A that
They had
don't
to.
need we said you don't need an attendant unless you stack up out into the street, and then you've got to have someone there. And is that?
Yeah, and like In-N-Out does that just by themselves to help move things along. But that was a condition on Chick-fil-A to have an attendant out there, but they're also warned if you back up on Maple, because that's a major thoroughfare, that you're going to lose your drive-through. And they're like, yeah, no problem. Right. So that's on them. If they can't make it work, great. If they can't make it work, they lose that privilege. We are not allowed to talk about the CUP of drive-throughs. So I don't think we're allowed to put this kind of restriction that we did on Chick-fil-A. But I think because we're talking about the design of the site plan, we can say, okay, if that stacks up, then an attendant's required. I agree that you shouldn't have an attendant out there if it's not needed.
Yeah,
that makes total sense. I think we can fashion some language that says, should the queue in either drive-through conflict
Right.
with traffic, then an attendant must be there to direct traffic.
And the term is to conflict with traffic, flow of traffic on El Segundo Boulevard.
on public streets.
Public
Well,
streets,
yeah,
thank
'cause
you.
Nash is going to be a public street,
Right,
and if people are
exactly.
coming around and trying to get on that queue, then
Yeah.
you're going to
Exactly.
be blocking Nash.
Or Continental. Yeah,
The applicant
That's
would
reasonable.
be fine with that type of condition being imposed. No
I mean, I
issue.
trust you guys know how to make this thing work, but our job is to kind of look at the downside and try to figure out how to avoid disaster whenever possible.
Yeah.
I do like that meandering bike path, though. Looks nice.
Yeah, it is
you know?
nice.
Yeah.
It is nice. Yeah, there's enough negative talk about having another light on El Segundo Boulevard without having traffic stack up too. So that's our concern, is to keep the citizens of El Segundo happy, the people who work in El Segundo happy.
It's our concern as well, in that unless this center functions properly, the citizens in El Segundo and the patrons to that shopping center won't be patrons any longer.
Right,
They'll
they
go
won't
somewhere
if
else
it's-
where it
if
works.
If it's chaos and it's just, oh my God, it's unbelievable. Every time I go, I can't get anywhere. It's stacked up, then that's not going to be a good thing for your center for sure.
All right, so moving location of that drive-through doesn't seem to be an option in your mind.
No.
So we're stuck with trying to make what we have before us work to the best of our abilities then.
And that's just with language, as you've expressed.
Something to that effect.
Now, I wonder too, if when Nash goes through, which is not very far away, if there would be a left turn out of the parking lot
Across the
onto
median?
going north on Nash.
Yeah.
We don't anticipate that.
Yeah, I think it would be a disaster, but, you know, it's worth thinking about.
Yeah, I don't know how you'd make that turn.
I am more concerned until Nash opens up. I am concerned about people trying to make a right turn, even though there's signage, even though, you know, it says unless you're a Raytheon employee. I think that could be a real potential issue. I almost wish that turnaround were at the below the guard shack or above the guard shack. That would almost make it easier. But,
I agree.
Maybe the solution is
That is a good point.
one way only, and we just don't worry about Raytheon employees being able to turn right there. They're going to have to go, you know, all the way back around or something. We just
Well,
don't-
if we have a 6-month approval, you know, then we can say, okay, you've got to make changes. You can't go right on Nash. Would that be something that could happen?
I don't
No
think-
exit, no right turn.
You mean sort of a conditional approval?
Yeah, if it gets to be too much of a problem for people turning right out of the parking lot onto Nash, so it's a real problem as far as parking is concerned, to just not allow a right turn there. And that would be something that would
Traffic, I
could
think
be
you meant.
changed, you know, after a 6 months examination, and say, oh my gosh, you know, it's just a zoo.
You mean traffic, not parking,
Traffic,
yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it would affect parking.
No.
And maybe I don't care that there's people all the time going to the guard gate saying, sorry, I made a mistake.
Commissioners, I guess, you know, the applicant would make the statement that as long as we're not backing traffic up onto El Segundo Boulevard, where indeed there is a problem, if it's inconvenient for Raytheon, because occasionally there's a patron from our center that goes the wrong way, I think they would say that they have 5,000 people coming to their campus on a daily basis, and they'd really want them to have the ability to go get a cup of coffee in the morning and then make that right-hand turn movement.
No, I agree. I don't think you get rid of the right-hand turn just because when Nash opens up, people are going to want to use that to avoid
I was
Sepulveda.
thinking of a
Yeah.
temporary solution.
No, so
And
that's
again,
what I
maybe
was
it's not a
thinking too.
problem, but
Let it be Raytheon's problem.
guarantee people are going to make that mistake.
Oh, sure
Oh,
they
yeah.
will. Sure they will.
They'll learn and then won't do
They'll
it
make the
again.
mistake once.
Yeah,
That's right.
yeah. They'll get used to it. All right, any other issues? I think we've kind of beaten the drive-through to death on this one.
One question about the internal crosswalks. It seems there's 2 on the west side, 1 on the east side. Is there any concern about crossing
How do I go back here?
from the parking lot to that, whatever the tenant is on the far east side?
Yeah. Oh, that's a good point. There's no crosswalk on the right-hand side of
Okay.
the lot.
I think as it relates to the crossing, the Raytheon pedestrian spine has been created here so that it's a very inviting spot. There'll be seating and places to stop along the way, and they will use this path of travel and come here and go here. The only way back onto the Raytheon campus is at this point. It's locked otherwise.
You mean for the average?
Right.
Yeah, but I'm
Person in the
talking
car.
about
Parking lot.
non-Raytheon
Across the-
employees
yeah,
on the
driving-
south side of the parking lot. There's no way to cross to those restaurants.
You've got this location, and I believe we actually had another location.
That's
Yeah,
the question.
Why isn't there one there?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just not reflected here. We actually had one planned here.
That's a good idea. Particularly so close to the intersection.
And for whatever it's worth, I think there's required code-wise to have an ADA path of travel out to the trash locations here as well.
Is that trash? That far?
In this, correct, we'd actually love to have the trash back here, but again, I think code provides for a requirement to have an ADA path of travel out to that location.
All right, well, any other proposed modifications besides the parking lot attendant to monitor drive-throughs?
The crosswalk, making sure
Well,
that
as long
that's
as we
adequately.
have, as you said, monitoring and evaluation of 6 weeks, 24, 24, 24.
Months, you mean?
Because it's a, yes, exactly, because it's a moving target. Okay.
So now we gotta figure out the language will be that we're gonna propose to add to the conditions. for
If
the
I
parking
may,
lot
we
attendant.
could go back to the Chick-fil-A approval and modify that condition.
Yeah, you'd have to remind me what that was.
Yeah, I will have to remind myself as well, but I think that the key point was that if it causes any sort of impacts onto public streets, that it could, this would have to be modified in some fashion, including possibly use of attendants to direct the traffic to loop around and stack. Or if it continues to be a problem after that, then we can always go back to the CUP and revisit that. That's the worst case. We don't want to do that, of course.
Right.
But there's lots of options that can be explored. It can be made a double drive-through at the beginning. That could add about 4 more cars if the tenant warrants it. And until we know who the tenant is, we really can't say.
Right. I'd rather they come back if they want a double.
Well, if they wanted to double and it was encroaching into the setbacks, it would, in
They'd
some
have to come
fashion, would
back.
have to come back anyway. Yeah.
That way, at least we get to see it and see if it's going to work, and because it may be, who knows. The language I propose would be any drive-through which backs up beyond the established queue onto a public street, and that would include Nash, even though it's not currently public, because one day it will be, would require the staffing of a parking lot attendant to ensure traffic does not impede upon public streets. If you keep the problem on your property, that's better.
Understand.
And that's the intention.
And that's the intention.
That's right.
Do we
It's our problem to manage on the property.
Do we want to build in some sort of time element, like regularly backing up or after a period of review? I'm just thinking, like, if it's a one-time thing, maybe it's not a concern, but maybe if it's an ongoing issue.
Yeah, I
Well,
mean,
one
that's,
time, same time, every day,
Right.
That's a problem.
Regularly backing up.
yes.
I mean, the enforcement and monitoring is always the tricky part on these things.
Yeah.
It's really going to be complaint driven.
We would ask,
Totally.
though, of the commission that, again, it's to address that peak time period at 9:30 in the morning. If we wind up with a hamburger place out there, we'd ask that not to have the need for an attendant.
No, you only need the attendant when
If you have a problem.
have the overflow
A consistent
of the
problem,
queue.
yeah.
Yes.
And we need the attendant during the
Yeah,
hours
that's
that
The problems
The
occur.
problem exists.
Yeah,
Right.
right. Yeah,
We
that's
don't
totally,
want someone sitting in the parking lot not doing anything. But if there is a peak period, if it's a breakfast place or even like a Starbucks, I think you'll have more in the morning. But who knows? We don't know what the tenant is.
and then the other thing was just adequate signage. Do you plan on no right turn or right turn only for Raytheon employees, or not an exit, or have you thought further about how to mitigate that? Don't know. You'll just work through that?
We'll work through it with our
Okay.
traffic engineer to come up with appropriate language on the sign.
Sure.
But you'll have some sign there trying to warn people,
Yes.
Yeah.
and they'll make the mistake once and hopefully
Just like,
never do it
don't
again.
do it. Don't, no. Don't do it.
No, no, no. Okay, I will make,
I'm sorry,
go ahead, please.
And as long as if you're gonna add, and I hope you will, add the crosswalk, across that main, driveway, please add one also, yes, there, please also add one across where the bike lanes are on, El Segundo. I
Yeah.
don't know if that's city right away.
Mean right here?
No.
No,
where the
on your
light
new
is.
driveway?
El Segundo.
Yeah, there's certainly going to be a
The middle
crosswalk there.
driveway.
Uh-huh, where there's a break.
Right there.
This is just a landscaping.
No.
Right there, yes.
Is that city right away
That's
there?
crossing El Segundo. It's
No, that would be on their property.
Yeah, so please also on that as well. No, that's parallel to El Segundo.
Okay, okay, okay.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
that's true. That's true.
As one who's likely to be on a bicycle there, yes, it makes a lot of sense.
Mr. Chair, can you repeat your proposed language again? Any drive-through on the results in a backup of traffic
Yeah,
on a public
any-
street would require an attendant?
Would require an attendant to ensure that the cars queue properly and stay on the property and don't encroach upon any public street, including Nash.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Currently, it's not public, but the goal is to make it public, so we should have that language in there to specify that Nash is included. I mean, you'd really have to be popular to get all the way back to El Segundo Boulevard, but I can definitely see cars stacking on Nash. Okay, any other questions for the applicant? Thank you guys for showing up and answering all our questions. Appreciate it.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Any other questions? If not, I will close public communication, and all further comments shall come from the dais.
Good
Anything else?
conversation? No? And then nothing for me?
No, I think if we monitor and make adjustments as necessary.
So what are we going to do about, we have the language about needing the attendant out there, but to Mr. King's point, you know, what language you do to have this be enforced? Like,
Well, I
how-
think it's got to be complaint driven. I think you said that. It's going to be
Yeah.
people, oh my God, I
El
just
Segundo
can't go
Parents
there.
Network is- My guess is we'll hear something.
delegate all authority
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
a Facebook
Yeah.
group.
I don't know if there's a legal reason to have a timeline, but I think from a code enforcement perspective, I think that language works. I think we get a complaint, we go out there, we see that situation.
Right.
I think it'll work.
And then you can say, hey, condition whatever, you
There's a
guys need it
condition, yes.
in the morning hours.
Yeah.
All right.
The other, I'm sorry, the other advantage of not putting a time frame is that it just runs forever.
Yes.
Yeah, right. Basically,
So-
we're telling you make it work. Don't have any problems. If there's a problem, then
Fix it.
you got to fix it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually pulled up some of the language from Chick-fil-A. We just said it can't queue on the street. The applicant agrees to provide these conditions of approval to the drive-through operator. And then the applicant expressly acknowledges that any violation of this condition would be subject to CUP to revocation or modification by the planning commission.
Good. Let's
So
add
the
that.
planning commission at any time can pull up a conditional use permit. So if one of these uses is causing a lot of problems, then it's within the purview of the planning commission to call it up and, you know, add more conditions of approval. It's a conditional use permit. So
Right.
it has to conform with, you know, as long as if they're not complying with the conditions, then we can always bring it back and have a hearing and discuss it.
I appreciate that point. I don't want to scare off any of their future tenants. Chick-fil-A is a special beast in and of itself that we know is going to drive traffic, and it's right on PCH and Maple, which is a major thoroughfare. So I thought at that time it was important to put them on notice that we will take away your drive-through if you don't make it work. There's enough room here where they can do what In-N-Out did, and In-N-Out has not been a problem for us. In fact, the intersection has greatly improved since that shopping center got redone. So I don't want to put that type of harsh language in there, and it can be up to the landlord to decide if the tenant's going to pay for that. It'll be in the conditions of approval, so I'm sure that whatever tenant is will be aware of that obligation. And I think, as you said, just having the ability to always call up a CUP and say it's not working, I'm okay not having that extra Chick-fil-A language in there. Just a little heavy-handed.
It also seems a little heavy-handed to put a condition that identifies pulling a CUP when you're dealing with a site plan review, so.
Yeah, that's a good point, too.
But we got the point. We recognize that that's an option, and I think that the language that was stated can be crafted into a nice condition that we can add.
Okay.
It's a
That
good
makes
problem to
sense.
have. I mean, you want them to be successful.
That's right.
Let's face it, yeah.
Right, and they're motivated to make it work.
Right.
All right. All right, any other discussion, or we get a motion?
Okay. I move we adopt resolution number 2869 approving the site plan review and conditional use permit for the drive-through fast food restaurants and the rest of the project, including the new language that Chair Baldino inserted.
All right.
Before there's a second, can we modify that condition to not reference the conditional use permit for drive-throughs?
Yes.
Thank you.
So modified.
Yes.
I second that.
All right, a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you.
And the record should reflect that's a final decision by the Planning Commission that's subject to appeal within 10 days.
Thank you, Mr. King. All right, next is continued business none, which brings us to the report from our Planning Building Safety Director.
I actually, the Commissioner Keldorf, a couple meetings ago, had asked me to put a presentation together, or share the presentation that was shared at EDAC. I have it ready today, but kind of looking around the room, and it's been a long meeting, and I think I'll select a next shorter meeting to go through that.
Thanks, Sam. I'm still jet lagged. All right, Planning Commissioner comments?
None for me.
None for me.
I want to thank Commissioner Heschler for showing up to the City Council meeting. I was able to watch that today on the Raytheon project, and
Came home from Italy and watched that.
yeah, I'm kind of a nerd. Well, it was. I thought our discussion was important about the park, and I couldn't be there because I was out of the country. So I was glad that you went there and kind of expressed how a private park gives us no public benefit. And procedurally, I know it was introduced. So what's the next step on that Raytheon deal? I know it comes back.
Yeah, the second reading and vote will be on September 3rd.
Okay. Because when I watched the City Council, I know Dr. Brand was like, I haven't had enough time to look at this. And then it was like, I'll introduce it, and then it was done. So will there be another public hearing and discussion on that?
No, but there are 3 weeks before they take up the second reading, so we intend to have an opportunity to talk to them before that.
Right, but is there any opportunity to get a development agreement or any consideration? Or are you saying that's just an opportunity to bring Mr. Brand or Dr. Brand up to speed?
Well, no, the vote is for the amendment to the development agreement.
Right.
And if Dr. Brand persuades 2 others that some change should be made, then they won't take that vote, and they'll continue the hearing.
Yeah, actually, an ordinance has to be read twice in order to be approved. You can't really make substantive changes in the middle of the process. So if there were changes to be made, what they'd have to do is eventually reintroduce the revised amendment to the DA, if that's what the council wants to do. Of course, members of the public can go to the meeting and during public communications, talk about it.
I just feel like the city has missed an opportunity with that Raytheon project to even explore some future public benefit or development agreement. It came to us with basically no public benefit, and what Raytheon is getting is basically millions of dollars in cost savings.
And entitlements.
And, well, they already got the entitlements,
Oh, yeah.
right? And they were going to have to do all these things 1 square foot in phase 2. And now they're able to phase it out where they can push that and get someone else to pay for it. The Daily Breeze has an article about the sale of the Raytheon property, and they reported that this one little piece of land that we just talked about sold for $48 million. Yeah. These guys paid $48 million for this little sliver.
And how many acres is that?
It's a fraction of what everything else is out there.
7.4.
Right,
That's right.
right.
Almost exactly the
So
same.
we've got this large publicly traded corporation making millions of dollars on entitlements, and there's no development agreement? Like, I scratch my head.
There is a development agreement. That's what is being amended. Did you?
Right, no, there's a development agreement, but my concern is that who is the negotiator of the city who is negotiating with Raytheon to make sure, yeah, you're getting all these great entitlements, you're making multi-millions of dollars on these benefits from the city. What does the city get in return? A park, maybe?
Yeah. There's no accountability for who's actually the person that does that.
Right, and it's not my job.
No, I
we-
believe the answer
um,
is the city council is the answer. But the city council several years ago was the answer.
But if you recall, in the presentation that was done at council, when you talk about street improvements, traffic improvements,
Sure.
when you add it all up, it was well above $50-60 million. When you add it all
That's
up.
stuff they already agreed to, Sam.
Yes, they
That was
agreed to.
all. That was all the original deal, and then they came back and got another modification, right?
Yes.
I mean, look at the D.R. Horton deal. The school district got the entitlements. They sold the land to D.R. Horton. D.R. Horton added like roof decks and increase in FIR, and we got like $1 million. Raytheon is getting far more monetary benefit out of this revision to their design deal, and all we're pointing to is the stuff they already are obligated to do and already promised to do. So I don't know what the solution is. I just am concerned that the current process is not working for the best interest of the folks who live in El Segundo. And that's really my concern. So let me know when that next city council meeting is.
September 3rd.
September 3rd?
Yes.
Okay. I'll try to make that.
So that'll be the second hearing, and at that point, city council can either ask for the development agreement to go back and be renegotiated, or they can approve it.
Right, but the public hearing was closed, so if you want them to,
Is there one more public hearing?
no, if you want them to reopen that, you have to address it during oral communications, which is at the beginning of the meeting, so.
So
that-
basically, the next city council meeting, they just read the ordinance.
Well, it would be on the consent calendar, and somebody would have to pull it. So if you speak to them about the issue and someone desires to pull it, then it does effectively become another hearing.
Sounds like there needs to be a little campaign.
All right. Any other planning commissioner comments? Okay, I thought we had a good discussion tonight. Thank you guys, and thank you staff for indulging us in all of our questions this evening. That brings us to adjournment. Our next meeting will be September 12th at 5:30 in these chambers. Thank you, everyone.